He walked out the way Tom Hanks always walks out, like the room had been waiting for him and was relieved he'd finally arrived. There is a quality to Tom Hanks that defies the usual vocabulary of celebrity. He is not magnetic in the way that word usually means, not dangerous, not unpredictable, not the kind of presence that makes you feel slightly off balance. He is something rarer and more difficult to manufacture, genuinely, constitutionally warm, the kind of warm that doesn't perform itself because it doesn't need to. He came through the late show curtain with that unhurried ease, that grin that somehow managed to be both entirely natural and entirely conscious. And 300 people responded the way they always responded to Tom Hanks, with the particular joy of people in the presence of someone who has never once let them down. He settled into the guest chair with the comfort of a man who had been doing this for 40 years and still found it interesting. At 68 he carried his age the way good wood carries its grain, visibly, honestly, beautifully. The silver hair, the slight thickening around the middle, the lines around his eyes that had been earned by decades of squinting at scripts and laughing at things that were genuinely funny. He looked like what he was, a man who had lived a full life and was paying attention to it. Stephen greeted him warmly. The band played, and for the first several minutes everything moved in the comfortable, intelligent rhythm of two people who respected each other and enjoyed finding out where the conversation wanted to go. They talked about the new film, a quiet drama, the kind of work that Tom kept choosing at this stage of his career, material that required something different from what spectacle required. They talked about the craft, about what it meant to still be finding things inside characters that surprised him after 4 decades of looking. Tom was generous and precise and genuinely funny, the humor arriving not as performance but as the natural byproduct of a man who paid close attention to things and found them mostly absurd and occasionally magnificent. He was entirely present, entirely himself. And then Stephen set down his note cards. "Tom," he said, "I want to ask you something personal." Tom raised an eyebrow. "I reserve the right to deflect with charm." Stephen smiled. "I know, but I'm going to ask anyway." He paused. "Is there someone in your life, someone who is gone now, that you wish you had said something to, something specific, something you held back?" The humor didn't disappear exactly, but it stepped back, made room for something else. Tom looked at Stephen for a moment, then out at the audience, then back at Stephen, and something that had been behind his eyes, behind the warmth, behind the ease, behind 40 years of being America's most trusted face, became briefly, quietly visible. "Yeah," he said, "there is." Stephen waited. "His name was Danny," Tom said. "Danny Carlson. We met in community theater in the late 70s. I was 21, 22, nobody, absolutely nobody, doing dinner theater in Sacramento and trying to figure out if any of this was real or if I was just a kid who liked to pretend." He paused. "And Danny was the funniest, smartest, most alive person I had met up to that point in my life. He could walk into a rehearsal and change the temperature of the room just by being there. He had this quality of absolute presence that I've spent my entire career trying to understand and reproduce and still don't entirely know how he did it." Stephen was very still. "We were close the way young men are close when they're both scared and ambitious and living on nothing and trying to make something real out of nothing," Tom continued. "The kind of close where you don't have to explain yourself, where the other person already knows what you mean before you finish the sentence, that kind of close." He looked at his hands. "And I left Sacramento. Things started moving for me slowly at first, then faster, and I left, and Danny stayed. He kept doing theater, kept working, kept being the most alive person in every room he entered. But the rooms got smaller as mine got bigger. That's not a judgment, it's just what happened. Careers are unpredictable and talent isn't the only variable, and Danny knew that better than anyone." He paused. "At some point in the early 80s, I think it was around 1982, right before things really started to change for me, I sat down and I wrote him a letter. A real letter, longhand, several pages. I told him everything. What I was afraid of, what I was hoping for, how much his friendship had meant to me during those years when I wasn't sure any of it was going to work. How I could feel the distance growing between our lives and how I didn't know what to do about it, and how I wanted him to know that none of it changed how I felt about him or what those years had meant." Tom stopped. "I wrote all of that, every word of it, and then I folded it up and I put it in an envelope and I addressed it and I—" He stopped. "I didn't send it," he said. "I put it in a drawer, and I told myself I'd send it later when there was more time, when things were less crazy, when I had figured out a better way to say what I was trying to say." And the drawer closed, and the months became years, and the years became decades. The studio was very quiet. "When did Danny pass?" Stephen asked softly. 11 years ago, Tom said. Heart attack, he was 58, still doing theater, still in those rooms, still changing the temperature when he walked in, still the most alive person everywhere he went. He looked up. I spoke at his memorial. I flew back to Sacramento and I stood up in front of people who had loved him and I talked about what he had meant to me. And it was true, everything I said was true. But I kept thinking while I was saying it, he never heard this. I'm saying this to a room full of people who already know it. The one person who needed to hear it, the one person I wrote it all down for 11 years ago in a letter that I never sent, he never heard it. The first tear came then, not dramatically. Tom Hanks did very few things dramatically off-screen. Quietly, a single tear on his right cheek sitting there in the amber stage light without apology. The letter is still there, Tom said. Still in the drawer. I've moved a dozen times since 1982 and every single time I've carried that drawer with me. I've never opened it again, but I've never thrown it away. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Stephen stood up from behind his desk without announcement, without drama, and walked around to sit on the edge of it, facing Tom directly. He said nothing for a moment. He let the silence be what it needed to be. Why haven't you opened it? Stephen asked finally. Tom looked at him. The question had found something real. Because opening it would mean reading what I wrote, Tom said. And reading what I wrote would mean understanding exactly what I didn't do and exactly when I decided not to do it and exactly what that cost. And he stopped. I'm not sure I'm ready to know that precisely. Stephen looked at him steadily. Tom, he said, can I ask you something that might be difficult? You've been asking me difficult things for the last 10 minutes, Tom said, the faintest trace of a smile. What do you think the letter says? Stephen asked. Not what you wrote, you know what you wrote. What do you think it says now? What do you think you were really trying to tell him? Tom was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that is doing real work. I think I was trying to tell him that he mattered, Tom said finally. Not in the abstract way, not in the way people say someone mattered when they mean they were a nice person. I mean specifically, precisely, concretely mattered. That there were things I could do, things I understood, ways I was able to be in the world that I would not have been able to do or understand or be without him. That he was load-bearing, in the architecture of who I became. He paused. And I think I was also trying to tell him that I was scared. That all of the forward motion, all of the momentum that was building in my life, felt terrifying in a way I couldn't fully explain. And that the one person who understood that terror, who had been in the rooms with me when I first felt it, was him. And I didn't know how to hold on to that across the distance that was opening up between us. Both eyes were wet now. Tom didn't reach for the tears. He was load-bearing, Stephen said quietly. That's a remarkable thing to say about a person. It's the right word, Tom said. Some people are decorative and some people are load-bearing. They hold things up. They make it possible for the structure to stand. And you don't always know which ones they are until you've moved past them and you look back and you see what they were doing all along. Stephen looked at him for a long moment. Tom, he said, I think you should open the letter. Tom looked at him. Not today, Stephen said quickly. Not here, but I think you should read what that 22-year-old wrote, not because it will change anything, not because Danny can hear it now, but because that kid, the one in Sacramento who was scared and ambitious and living on nothing and trying to figure out if any of it was real, he deserves to be witnessed. He wrote something true and he put it in a drawer and he never got to find out if the truth was received. He paused. Open the letter. Read what he wrote, witness him, because he's part of why you became what you became, and he deserves that. Something broke open in Tom Hanks's face. Not loudly. The way things break open in Tom Hanks with the particular grace of a man who has spent his entire career understanding how human beings feel things and can therefore feel them himself with unusual clarity and depth. Danny would have thought that was very pretentious, Tom said. His voice was rough, the faintest, most fragile smile underneath the tears. Stephen laughed, a real one. He sounds like he was wonderful, Stephen said. He was the best, Tom said. He was genuinely the best, and I'm going to find that letter when I get home tonight, and I'm going to open it, and whatever's in it, whatever that kid was trying to say, I'm going to finally read it. He looked out at the audience, not at the cameras, at the people. If you have something unsaid, Tom said, something in a drawer somewhere, metaphorical or literal, a letter you wrote and didn't send, a call you meant to make, a thing you've been meaning to tell someone that you keep deciding to tell them later, he stopped. There is no later that is guaranteed, I know you know that, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. Feel it, say the thing, send the letter. The applause that followed was the kind that happens when a room full of people has just been reminded of something they already knew and needed to remember. Not celebratory, something quieter and more important than celebration. The recognition of something true. Tom Hanks had walked onto the Late Show carrying a letter that had been in a drawer since 1982. He walked out having promised himself he would finally read it. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Danny Carlson finally heard what his friend had been trying to say. That night, laughter gave way to grace, and television remembered what it was for.